So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be doing a debrief on Arizona and what happened in this election cycle. And with us today is Adrian Fontes, who's the recorder for Maricopa County. And he's going to go into detail on how he's protecting democracy and our voting, protocols to make sure that every vote gets counted. But before I go into all the great things he's doing, I wanted to just thank everyone for all your support for PowerPack over the years. We've been doing this work for over a decade now, and we've been in battleground states all over the country, including in Georgia. We've been there actually for over 10 years. And we're just so overjoyed and happy at the results of this general election. Taking out Donald Trump has definitely been one of the most important elections of my generation. And I've been through a lot, as you all know. So I do think that, we're just so very, very grateful to all of you for supporting us and being with us. But there's a lot of work to be done. And I think people can see from some of the congressional races that we lost, and then the upcoming runoffs in Georgia, that there is so much more work to be done. And so we're going to be doing these debriefs, but a lot of this is about, getting you familiar with all of our work and starting to kind of get you involved even further in the stuff we're going to do in the next couple cycles. And then one of the things that I wanted to point out this year that was really innovative, really helpful to us at PowerPack is we were able to partner with Crooked Media and the Pod Save America gang. And that actually helped us raise over $900,000, which we invested in battleground states all over the country. In particular, we invested in Arizona, and we also were able to do a couple other get out the vote projects in Arizona. So one was to identify drop-off boxes and to get information about those out to the public. And in that process, we were able to get to know Adrian, and he was able to really help us a lot with making sure that we had up-to-date data, and also was able to kind of teach us and educate us on the whole process of what we were kind of working on. People may not know, but the Maricopa County Recorder position is an elected position. So not only was he making sure that democracy was protected, but he was also running a campaign. And he'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I do want to really laud his work and really let you know that he's made huge changes in the way this business is done, and has really been innovative in making sure that the process is protected and that there was no question about how this thing is going. So I want to welcome him. Thank you so much, Adrian, for working with us on this. And I want to hand it over to you and see kind of what you were up to.
Well, first, thank you very much to you and to PowerPack and all the supporters who've been making a lot of difference across the country in, I guess, ensuring that the fundamental rights of Americans are maintained. I mean, that's what elections and higher turnout numbers and higher registration numbers and sort of the nuts and bolts and the guts turn into the fulfillment of the promise of democracy. And I think it's incredibly important that that work continue. And so congratulations for the years of work that you've had. And the progress that you've made where you've been active to a degree, including here in Arizona. As a matter of very brief introduction for folks, I'm an Arizona native. My family has been down just south of the Gila River here for about 300 years. And we take a lot of pride in being Arizona through and through. And I got elected to be Maricopa County Recorder, ironically, in 2016, and many of you can recall that the status of elections administration in the second largest voting jurisdiction in the county was pretty dim at the time. But since taking office in January of 2017, we added almost 500,000 new voters to the rolls in just 4 years. That's about a 20% increase, and I'm very, very proud of that. And I would love not just this to be a conversation between myself and Andy, but get any other input that y'all have. Let me highlight one or two really quick things, though, before I pitch it back and we get moving. When I first got into office, Arizona's unique. We have a bifurcated voter registration system. Some of our voters are only eligible for a federal ballot. We're the only state in the union that has that. and they can only vote for federal offices, president, Senate, and Congress. That's it. And that came out of the Supreme Court many years ago. Well, when I first took office, we found 96,000 rejected voter registration forms, literally collecting dust in a closet. And we registered a lot of those folks. We had an attitude in the office, as you can see on this top slide, that was blaming the voters for the problems that the voters had, which is typical for a lot of folks, right? Find a system, defund the system, ruin the system, and then blame the system for being bad, and then move forward in not serving the public as that particular corner of government is deemed to be serving them. And so we really did a lot of work. As you can see, between then and now, we had a voter-centric attitude. We have improved across the board with a new voter check-in system that reduced check-in times from 4 minutes to less than 1 minute, where folks can just scan their driver's license and boom, they're checked in. We can update addresses automatically, live load that back to our voter registration database. We have eliminated double voting. We've eliminated a lot of the other provisional balloting issues that existed. We opened up communication with voters. You can see on that second slide there, the stickers. We now have a series of 4 stickers that we include in our ballots. I actually have some right here. They're kind of fun. We created Fill the Ballot, that guy right there, who is a wonderful way to reach out to people. We modernized our infrastructure on the inside. We were about 30 years behind in technology. And we opened up vote centers, which really increased the options that voters had. And we ended up with an 80.5% voter turnout. And we only had 165,000 voters vote on election day. And for context, we had about 2.6 million eligible voters, almost 2.1 million voted. And so out of all of that, we only had 165,000 show up on election day to vote in person. So we've seen some significant changes in voting patterns. We're talking to voters, we're helping voters get engaged. And then of course, one of the great things about democracy, it's just like the old work I did back in the day as a trial lawyer. You never know what the result's going to be because it's up to somebody else. I did, unfortunately, not get reelected a couple weeks ago, but that was only by 0.2%. 5,000 vote margin separated myself from staying in the office, and now I get to do a lot of other stuff. And I think once we get through the conversation of what has happened in Arizona and Maricopa County, we'll be able to talk about some of those other things. So that's just kind of a very quick introduction.
So just a couple things for the people that are seeing this through video tape is you can send questions to me, awong@powerpack.org, if you want to ask Adrian anything, because I know some of this is being done asynchronistically. So feel free to send me questions that I can forward to Adrian, including if you want to request a copy of a set of those stickers that he just showed, because I guess I can see if he has any left. But also, I do want to echo kind of some of what Adrian is pointing out. I mean, he had a very tough race to run at the same time running democracy in Maricopa County. So I do think that it shows how much that we do have more work to be done in Arizona, that there's more work that we need to do to support, rising stars like Adrian. And I want to make sure that, people understand that this is kind of a beginning of a conversation with Adrian, not kind of the end of it. But I do think people are interested in understanding, Adrian, like, what happened in Maricopa, like, what is your analysis? Why even at the end were mail-in ballots coming in, closing the margin? Why are some of these things happening? And, it's kind of the inside baseball kind of questions of like, what exactly was going on there? And what do you think are some of the reasons why Biden was really able to pull it out?
Well, we have an interesting system. I'll describe it very quickly in Arizona. We've been voting by mail. A majority of our voters vote by mail for a long time. We now have about 80% of our voters on what we call the permanent early vote list, because all of our ballots that we send out are technically early ballots under Arizona law. And the vast majority of our turnout tends to be that way. And I think it's incredibly important to put this in context. Let me go big picture a little bit. And I go back to some of my training in the Marine Corps when I talk about this. We're in an active zone. And I understand that we won Arizona, but Joe Biden won by less than twice as many votes statewide as I did. I mean, it was a very, very tight margin. And I think Mark Kelly, who came into the Senate, only got, I think, 80,000 more votes than Martha McSally did statewide. So while we won at the top of the ticket, we got hit really hard down low. Our sheriff, Paul Penzone at Maricopa County, who unseated the infamous Joe Arpaio, his margin was a lot tighter. I lost, and I was really kind of the county party standard bearer. We lost a little bit of ground in the House and in the state House and in the state Senate. I think we may have lost one seat. It was not a great election all in all across the board. And I think a lot of that has to do with a bunch of factors that we can get to, but the mechanics of the way the votes came in, I think are at the crux of Andy's question here. And so we'll talk about that. We have a 27-day early voting period. And that means we mail out the ballots at the beginning of that, and then they start coming in. And as you get closer to election day, they come in more and more and more. We have a very robust public information campaign that tells everybody a week ahead of time, stop mailing them in, bring them in person. And really the habit of our voters is they start bringing them in person, and we get a couple 100,000 of them in on election day that just get dropped off. And this time around, we expanded early voting locations into vote centers, so anybody could vote anywhere if they were voting in person, and they could drop them off, not just in those vote centers, but in drop-off locations where we partnered with a lot of the major league sports, right? The NBA, the Suns and the Mercury, the Arizona Cardinals of the NFL, the Arizona Coyotes of the NHL. Our hockey team gave us their lobby for a week for a vote center. Major League Baseball's spring training facilities all opened up for drop-off. So we had a very healthy set of choices for voters to either bring their ballots back or send them back in the mail or come and vote in person, which is exactly what we were hoping for. The pattern of returns during that early voting period was very advantageous for Democrats in the first couple of weeks of that 27-day period. And then the advantage turned from a blue lift down into a red shift that continued on to and through election day. And I think that there's one reason why that ended up happening. And one of the things that we saw a lot of during July and August and September, because we have a 29-day ahead of time voter registration cutoff, was that the GOP registered a ton of new voters in July and August and September, which is when Democrats and the Democratic Party typically, and the different organizations in the diaspora on the left, typically do a lot of their voter registration. Now, the Democrats had caught up quite a bit during the 4-year period from 2016 to 2020. But during that 3-month period, the GOP caught up by tens of thousands of voters per month, July and August and September. The other thing that they did, aside from just registering voters, is they had tons of folks out there knocking on doors. And we didn't. The local county party here, Maricopa County Party, which is an enormous party, we've got 20 of the 30 legislative districts in Maricopa County. It's a pretty large organization. They were doing our ground for my campaign and for several other countywide campaigns. They did not do door knocking. There were only a couple, maybe a handful of the smaller organizations out there on the political left that were knocking on doors. And the difference was stark. Again, with almost 2.1 ballots cast in Maricopa County, we lost the county attorney's race by 35,000 votes. That's a small portion of that 2 million plus. My race was 5,000 votes. And Joe Biden was really, really close. And so I think what happened was that while we won at the top of the ticket and we won the second US Senate seat, we were not healthy down ticket. And that's usually where that ground game comes in. That's where you build your bench. That's where a lot of the energy happens. And that's where you have the capacity to do what needs to be done like stop Arizona's legislature from passing voter suppression legislation next year, which they will do. And Governor Doug Ducey will sign that stuff. And they've already set up the narrative with what you may have heard of the Sharpie Gate lawsuits. There were at least 3 of them. The last one, it goes to trial tomorrow morning, even though our county board accepts the canvass tomorrow afternoon. One of the cases was dismissed with prejudice today, and the Republican Party actually has to pay the Secretary of State attorney's fees. But what they're doing is they're setting up the stage to justify a bunch of voter suppression laws to come into place in the name of security, in the name of accountability, in the name of verifiability. They're going to make it harder for Arizona voters to vote. And they were successful politically, so they get to do that. And so the fight is ongoing. Again, we're in an active zone, but we're not just in an active zone, Democrats versus Republicans. It's wrong-headed to think that way. We're in an active zone where there is no congruity in the conversations between the political left and the political right, particularly on the extremes. They don't even understand that each other exist. They're not listening to each other or talking to each other. And I think those are some big, big, big questions. And so what is the case is that, let me give you a quick example. Arizona is losing Latino men to the Republican Party, not because of racism or misogyny, but because of anti-machismo sentiment on the left and pro-machismo sentiment on the political right. And yet, these are men who want to be protectors and providers for and of their families, and strong unions, strong wages, strong families are what our policies promote, but they're going over to the right because of strongman rhetoric. And that's why we were so close in some of these areas. That's why I think the Latino vote is slipping away. And it's not, I don't think it's unwise to say that the Libre Initiative has taken hold in a lot of the very traditional Hispanic neighborhoods in South Phoenix and in West Phoenix, which is Maricopa County. Now, I can't speak to all of the rest of the state very intelligently, but we do have 2/3 of Arizona's voters here. So as goes Maricopa, so goes the rest of the state. Some of the other really important things that I think we have to look at are the idea that we are looked at as this really healthy purple state right now. But again, while we are a battleground, we missed an enormous opportunity. We missed a humongous opportunity to organize better on the ground, to get more voters registered, and to really beef up the traditional political activism that has proven to work very well in a lot of other places. We should have done better there. Other than that, what I think I'd like to do is, Andy, let you ask some more questions so that we can kind of nail down some of the specifics as we move forward.
There's a couple things I want you to comment on. I think you're bringing up some things that PowerPack is seeing around the country, some things we're worried about. And, you know, one of the biggest things is that, as you say, you know, we won with Biden and Kamala Harris, which is excellent, you know, history making. But the coattails and the down ballot races did not necessarily benefit all the time. And one of the things I'm interested in your commentary on, one is, so for the Latino or Latinx communities, you know, what are some of the things we have to be careful about right now? I mean, we were seeing things in Florida, seeing things in Texas, where there were pockets of Latinx voters that were just not with Biden. You know, Georgia is coming up and they have a significant Latino population there. So, you know, what are some of the things that we need to be careful about I think in reaching out to that population? But then secondly, based on what you've seen, you know, we're about to have these runoff elections that are part of whether this country is going to get better or not. You know, I mean, if we can win the 2 Senate races, then we might have a shot at making some really good policy changes at the federal level. And if we lose them, we're going to be in a stalemate for the next 2 to 4 years. So what is maybe some of your advice or some of your insight into what you would think that Georgia needs to be careful about and be thinking about as well. So I don't know if you can just expound on those two things.
Well, let me first talk to this idea of the Latino community, and thank you for that. Again, I happen to be, one of those folks who grew up down on the Mexican border in Nogales, Arizona. It was, although very heavily Mexican American, it was a very cosmopolitan place because there was so much trade. It's on the railroad goes through there, the Pan American Highway goes through there. There's brokerages and import, export, and all kinds of stuff. It's a very internationally aware town, even though it's a really small town. I think one of the things that's incredibly important, and you hear it all the time, but it is true. The Hispanic diaspora is what I'll call it, is not the same. Mexican American folks are not the same as Cuban American folks or Puerto Rican American folks, or, well, Puerto Ricans. Dominicans, we're all very, very different, and we're all very, very prideful of where we come from. But there is one thing that I think is very important, particularly that I can speak to as a Mexicano, right? And that is sort of what I touched on just a little bit. And I'll use the example of, and folks will forgive me, I'm a very blunt guy, and a lot of the stuff I say sometimes isn't the most popular thing among progressive groups, but hear me out. The term Latinx is, in my view, flat wrong in its use. And here's why. The word Latino is a gender neutral word. It comes from a gendered language, and it happens to end in the male gender, but it's also gender neutral. I know why we use Latinx. I understand the idea and the philosophy behind it, and I don't disagree theoretically. But the word itself is a word in Spanish. And when you X out what makes it a word in Spanish, you have disrespected that thing that we use to identify ourselves mostly, which is our language. And I don't think people think about that, how important that is. And that's one tiny little thing in a lot of what we do to push these communities aside. We don't, on the political left, celebrate strong, straight men who want to be providers and protectors for their families, who want to live in a household where one income will be enough, as it was in the days of very strong unions and very strong labor, where one income will be able to support the family. Not a man's income, any one income, right? The idea that family is sacrosanct, the idea that religion is okay, we hear a lot of these things a lot of the time. But when we don't pay attention to them and we put them aside and say, well, they'll get over it because we represent their issues, that's a little demeaning and it's a little dismissive. And the reality is, a guy like Donald Trump, who is a strong man, I actually think he's kind of a weak bird, but he portrays himself as a strong man. He is talked about as if he is strong. That isn't something that we should shy away from. It is something that we should embrace, and we should put, in many ways, back towards the front, if not near the front, when we want to get some of these folks back. And I'm not making excuses for misogyny or sexism. Don't get me wrong. All of that is garbage. I've got 3 teenage daughters myself, and I want them to be protected by processes, laws, and a society that sees them as equal. But I also want to make sure that my nephews and the rest of the little kids in my family can still maintain their cultural identity and not feel as if they're being rejected. And it's not, again, misogyny or racism. It's the self-identity that a whole swath of America has. It's the cop. It's the firefighter. It's the long-haul truck driver, right? These folks want to be providers and protectors. And they want to feel good about the role that they play. And in Georgia, you got a lot of Latinos out there who have come from other places, who work really damn hard a lot of the time. and they're doing it to provide for their families and protect their families. And yet what they're hearing a lot from the political left, for some good reasons, don't get me wrong here, for some good reasons, is a rejection of what they have internalized as their part of their identity. And I think we have to be very, very cognizant of the fact that many folks feel disrespected when a lot of the other interests seem to, and they don't push the traditional family roles out, but they seem to do that. We need to figure out, we need to be better as liberals, as progressives. We need to be better at speaking to protectors and providers who take great pride in doing really good stuff for their families. We need to be better at letting them know that with solid health care, with one job supporting each family, you can coach that little league team. You can be a den mom and be the chief wage earner. You can have what a lot of people want, which is sort of the nuclear family, you know, a couple of dads or whatever, but your version of it is welcome. I don't know that we're selling that. I don't know that we're telling folks about the importance of all of these things and then promoting that role in society. And so that's going to kind of be rough for some people to hear. But it's the same in Georgia as it is in Arizona, in my view, particularly when you're talking about some of these communities. Some of these communities whose political interests and ideals in policy consideration would be very, very aligned with us, and yet the rhetoric falls directly to the right. And so they're leaving us and they're going over there when it is against their self-interest, against their economic interest, against the educational interests of their children, against healthcare interests for their families. But they're hearing that narrative, they're hearing that storytelling that feels like that's home for them. And we've got to work on that. I think that's what we have to work on, Andy. As far as Georgia, what do? Hey, we got to sell our policies better, and we got to hit the ground. We can't hide behind Zoom calls and masks. We've got to figure out safe ways to knock on doors. We've got to have those face-to-face relationship building moments, even if it's 10 or 15 feet apart. We've got to hit the ground.
No, I do understand what you're saying, and you could probably even hear it in me, the struggle between using Latino and Latinx as terms. You know, I come from a generation where in my organizing days, we grew up really respecting kind of the term Latino and what it meant, and, you know, embracing kind of the kind of characteristics and culture, you know, that we were working within, and that was a part of what we as activists in the left needed to do. I think one of the other things that you're pointing out that I think is really important, you know, we've done polling in New Mexico, we've done work in Florida, we've done work in Georgia, and then we've done work in California. And, you know, and I live in San Francisco, where the Mission District is made up of, you know, Latin American immigrants, Mexican American immigrants, you know, and they're not all the same, and they don't all react to the word socialism the same, right? So you're going to have more people that are going to react. It's, you know, true in the Asian community too. I mean, whether you're Vietnamese or Chinese, when you throw out that, you know, Joe Biden's a socialist, it has a little bit of a different reaction. And, you know, when people are telling, you know, Asian folks that, you know, your culture is kind of foreign and we don't understand it, and why are you so backwards, you know, you start to kind of go, well, okay, well then why do I have to vote for you, right? So I do understand, I think some of the things that you're talking about, and I do think those are going to be dangers, especially you know, if you are a non-Latino candidate running in a place like Georgia, how do you speak to the Latino population? You know, how do you communicate and relate to it? And then the thing that you're saying about being on the ground, you know, how can you really kind of work that population like digitally? You know, it's like, how do you actually get to them, talk to them directly, and really kind of presents that you really understand what they're saying, as opposed to, you know, a 144 character kind of conversation. So I think those are real challenges. I do want you also to talk a little bit about what are some of the mechanical challenges that they might have in Georgia. I don't know if you've been watching some of the the recount that the Republican, Secretary
Yeah.
of State is doing, and what are some of the technical challenges that are going to be going on in Georgia as well?
Well, I think one of the things, I'll go to the technical challenges first. I think it's significant. I don't think, first and foremost, I don't think the results are going to change. There are processes and procedures in place, as most of you know, across the United States and jurisdictions everywhere that have gotten us so much better than we were in 2016. Look, the successes that we created in Maricopa County, the fact that we have Harris County calling us and some other folks calling us for advice means that the idea of sharing best practices across the United States really is working out well. And we can see that in Georgia, the increased amount of participation, sort of a lot that has to do with organizations like PowerPack and others have really brought a lot more attention into sort of the details and the workings and the administration's specifics, the election administration specifics. All of that having been said, the mechanics are really incredibly important. And I'm not an expert in Georgia administrative processes, but generally speaking, what you really want to make absolutely certain of, and I think they're doing pretty well based on what I've seen, is creating the audit trail. And particularly with a hand count, that can be incredibly cumbersome, incredibly difficult, and very, very expensive. And one of the things that I think people can rest assured of is that in Georgia, like in Arizona and a lot of other places, when you do these exercises, you've got to have folks from both parties participating directly in the oversight of these, if not in the specific handling of the ballots, in the particular handling of the ballots. So for us, for example, every time we open a vote by mail envelope and pull the ballot out, that's done by hand by two folks sitting across from each other who are of different political parties. The hand count, as I understand it in Georgia, is actually done in a very similar way, where you've got a couple of folks looking at a ballot. One will look at the ballot, call the result of that particular contest, somebody else will, and then they'll be able to compare those notes. That's an incredibly cumbersome process. It takes a lot of time. I haven't heard of what any of the estimates are for them finishing up. I do know one thing though, and I will be very clear about this. There are no releases of preliminary data. And so anybody who is saying, oh, we're on this track or we're on that track or so-and-so's winning or so-and-so's losing, don't pay any attention to any of that stuff because they're not officially releasing any of the numbers as they move forward. That's my understanding. But as far as these things go, there's rarely a significant enough shift to make a difference in the actual outcome unless it's an incredibly close race. And I think when I describe incredibly close for a statewide in a place like Georgia, for example, I don't think that they were that close. I don't think that they were within the margin of possible error when you get to the hand count. One of the problems that I have with hand counts generally is that human beings are flawed far more than our machines are. And I know a lot of people really think that, the hand count is the way to go. Well, it may be a way to go if you have very small precincts where you have just a couple hundred ballots and you've got a few contests on each of those ballots and it's not super cumbersome to do. But when you're talking about tens of thousands of ballots being processed by boards, you're talking about expanding the possibility of error to a far greater degree than you would in a very, very small place with a very small number of ballots. And so when you talk about volume like this, I think there's more room for error. That having been said, the folks in Georgia understand very clearly, as do all election administrators across the country, they're under a lot of scrutiny. They're under a ton of scrutiny. So I think they're going to do a good job. I haven't heard anything coming out of Georgia, and some of the folks that we chat with occasionally over there, which we haven't done very recently because they're a little busy. I haven't heard anything that would make me believe that there's going to be any problem or that the result is going to change. Most of what I hear out of Georgia is how are we going to do in early January? how are we going to make early January go the way we want? And that's really more on the political side than the election administration side, which I like to keep separate in my head, because you can't jumble all that stuff up too much. It turns into a mess. And I've got enough stuff in my head. I don't need messes on that side of things.
So one other question I wanted to ask you about, and I just wanted you to know, I have my Sharpie right here.
I've got mine right here, Sharpie Gate.
So what did you think of media coverage of your guys's, election? And, I'm a big fan of baseball, and for a time it felt like I was watching a sporting event, where there was like updates on statistics every 5 minutes, and there was like, waiting for the next kind of score coming, and so on, and to see who is winning, who is losing, whatever. How did you feel about the way the media kind of descended on you guys, and what was that like?
Well, it was really fun and interesting for me, because not only was I charged with kind of running the whole thing, but I was in a very tight and very narrowing race. I mean, on election night, I was ahead by over 100,000 votes, and I ended up losing by just 5,000. So that got chunked away bit by bit by bit. But the media was really interesting because, first of all, I don't know, you guys may have seen it. I know Maricopa was all over the news. There was this like free speech zone that I set up in front of the office, which was right outside of where my office is, and Ray and Scott, the co-directors' offices are. We had talked to the sheriff's department right before election day, and I said, I want a fence here, and if you can give us this kind of fence, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay. And then I kind of, this is kind of a fun thing. The protesters I knew were going to be yelling out there about, open the doors and let us in, circa 2000 Bush v. Gore, with all those kind of Republican activists banging on the doors. So we had already had cameras set up all through the ballot tabulation center, through the ballot processing areas. The entire inside of that building was set up with cameras, and you could watch them on the internet. And so instead of letting them have fuel and just fencing them away from the building, we did that. But we also set up those little yellow placards that you see on the street with the sign that says vote here. And instead of that, we put QR codes so they could log into the internet with their phone and watch what was happening inside the building while they were standing outside protesting. So there was no impetus for them to, go towards the doors or anything like that. It was really funny. One of my friends said it was the best troll of the election season, and the media kind of liked it because they got to be on the other side on the inside of the fence by the building, because they were coming in and out, filming in our sort of public space, and they would come back out. Sheriff's Department was out there. I think they made few mistakes. The media did. In recent election, 2016, I think in 2018 a lot, they really focused in on a lot of what they perceived to be missteps. And when we clarify things, they didn't give the clarifications and the explanation, as much coverage as they did the missteps, of course. This time around, they were checking really well. We had a really aggressive media strategy. We did a lot of earned media ahead of time, talking about, here's what the process looks like, here's how things work. And you could see it in the coverage where they're looking at sort of the protesters and they're like, here's these guys again, because they knew, and we had taken the time to educate the media ahead of time, that our process had verifiability, that our process had a lot of integrity, that we had set up over the last several years, not just a relationship with the media to get through this, but a system that was solid. And we had brought them in. We showed them our system. We showed them the new tabulation system that we spent $6.5 million on. We showed them the new vault that we created. We showed them the new servers and that one secured ballot tabulation center, completely isolated from the internet, where from the scanners to the server, you can actually stay in the public area and look at through the glass, the wires as they go across the room to the server, and see that the server is not connected to anything but those computers, those scanners. So we did everything that we could ahead of time to blunt the media's, I hate saying it, but their laziness.
right? We educated them ahead of time. We made sure that they had the information they needed to cover us effectively. And I think they did. And I think they were interested in sort of the steps. Well, you've got this many of this kind of ballot. What does that mean for these kinds of ballots? And sometimes they were asking really great questions. I got a couple of questions where they're like, well, you guys put out this and this and this. And I hadn't even seen the numbers that had been put out yet because I was dealing with other stuff. I'm like, hold on a second, I'm not really sure yet. And, so I think they did a pretty darn good job. They kept the hyperbole down somewhat. And I'm speaking generally here. There's always the exception to the rule. They kept the hyperbole down. They covered stuff pretty squarely. But I think the media also understood that, and I think generally, nationally, the media came to the understanding after 2016 that they are the fourth estate of this democracy, and being vilified as much as they had been by the administration, by being, breathed on and spat upon and called enemies of the state, they realized that they can't just sell commercials with headlines. They got to educate people, or at least move towards a much more sober view, a much more mature, grown-up view of these issues. And I think they did that pretty well, at least what I saw here being covered locally. I didn't pay a ton of attention to a lot of this stuff nationally, but that's, because I was busy. A little bit.
A little bit. There must have been at least one stupid question that you were asked. Is there? Can you remember one?
Oh God, no. Yeah, of course there's stupid questions. It's the media.
So what was one of the dumbest questions that you got asked?
Well, one of the most fun questions I got asked was fill the ballot modeled after me. And I mean, I don't think that's an unfair question. So there's Phil and there's me.
That does look a little, yeah.
And the answer is no. I mean, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. That was kind of one of the fun questions. I think it's hard to say dumb questions in the world of election administration because this is very complex stuff. I mean, so Sharpiegate, right? The bleed through on the ballots. We had been telling people in Maricopa County for 30 years not to use Sharpies. And in fact, some little tiny corners of our website still had those don't use a Sharpie instructions, because the old system used a specific kind of paper and a specific alignment that if it bled through, it could cause an overvote on the other side of the ballot.
Right.
Well, this new system, Sharpies are recommended by the manufacturer because the ink dries much more quickly. And in the polling places, when you put it through the tabulator, if you use a regular ink stick, it gets sticky and it can clog up the tabulator, but a Sharpie will dry faster. So we did 180 degrees on Sharpies, and that's why we had Sharpiegate. And that's why the GOP sued us 3 different times. And in fact, the second Sharpiegate 1 and 3 have been dismissed. Sharpiegate 2, like I said, is going to trial tomorrow. But it's not, I don't think that's a dumb question. And I don't think that's a dumb issue, because we had put into the culture, the voting culture, this idea that Sharpies are bad. And I think that that's a lesson in communication and reinforcement of adjustments and modifications in the administration of elections. We needed to be better at communicating better on that point, which I think is also a lesson for political campaigns and get out the vote campaigns. And that is, understand what the messages were in the past. Understand what the lessons that we've been teaching are in the past if we're going to be shifting things, because you can't just shift something from a focus group and think you're going to get 60 or 70,000 people to understand that that change was made. Yeah, to educate people. There's a lot of work involved in those sorts of things, even if it is just going from a pen to a Sharpie.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think it's so amazing that you were able to get the turnout you were able to get. I mean, I think with all of the complexities of voting, all the different ballots, et cetera, I think it was great that folks on the ground, as well as your office and other offices, were able to get such an important turnout.
Well, we made it easy for voters, and if if I could riff on that just for a second. In my administration, we had 3 foci. The first one was voter experience, and that includes educating voters on the time, place, and manner of their elections. The second was transparency and accountability, and the third was security. But that first one was kind of all-encompassing. And by focusing on voters and focusing on their experience, sort of turning the camera from what my predecessor was saying, like it's the voters' fault for standing in line, which you don't blame the voters for something that goes wrong. You're the one running it. You're responsible, right? So being honorable enough to take responsibility for what you're putting out there and having the integrity to own your mistakes, because 2018 wasn't perfect. I owned it, but we got past it. These are the things that we need to do as leaders. These are the things that we as organizations out there need to do too. We need to own and be responsible for everything that we're talking about and everything that we're pushing out there for the benefit of the people that we are purporting to lead, right? So we got to understand them and where they're coming from, but we also have to own what it is that we're putting out there. That's important.
So, I'm going to start wrapping up here. I think there's a couple last questions I wanted to shoot at you. So the first is, over the next 2 years, over the next 4 years, what do you think are some of the most important things for Arizona right now? A lot of our supporters are interested in the state. Now that we've flipped it for the presidential, how do we make sure that it doesn't flip back? And also, how do we make sure that down ballot races and so on we start to really win on a consistent basis? So what's the future for Arizona over the next few years?
Well, I think one of the most critical exercises that we have coming up is redistricting. The Independent Redistricting Commission here in Arizona was constitutionally created, but of course, Governor Ducey has figured out a way to stack it with some of his folks. And so I think we're going to get some blowback from the way Governor Napolitano got us plenty of blue seats. I think we're going to have some heavy gerrymandering into red seats at the congressional level. So there's that. Redistricting is going to be a very important fight here in Arizona. Number two, and I mentioned this earlier, the voter suppression onslaught of laws and proposed changes is coming. I can tell you right now it's coming. Senator Michelle Ugenti-Rita from LD23, Kelly Townsend, who went from the House to the Senate. A lot of these folks really want to make it harder for voters to vote. They really genuinely do. That's like their goal in life. And we were able to fight them off for 4 years. I actually stood behind a lot of the Republican recorders, county recorders in our Recorders Association, and let them do the lobbying on our pro-voter stuff. I let the Board of Supervisors, Maricopa's supervisors, which is 4-1 Republican, I did the work of explaining to them why some of the laws that had been proposed in the past were bad, and let them use their lobbyists to defend it, because coming from me, they would have said, we're doing it no matter what. So there's a lot of politics behind the scenes on this, as everybody knows. I think that's going to be incredibly important. But again, and as you mentioned, I think the third and very important thing is we're like a lot of places. When we lose elections like this, we lose our bench. We lose incumbency. We lose the bully pulpit. We lose the office. This office is the registrar and chief administrator for the second largest voting jurisdiction in the United States of America. 2.6 million voters belong to me. And as of December 31st, they won't be mine anymore. I'm not leaving I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying in the fight, and we're going to figure out exactly where I'm going to be real damn soon. Because again, we're in an active zone. We're in a bizarro world of who's talking to who and how that's working. So we've got to figure out exactly what to do next. But those are the three big things I think that we have to concern ourselves with. Redistricting is going to be huge in Arizona, as it is everywhere else. Our legislature will be very, very, very aggressive and really paying attention to down ballot races, especially when, look, God bless Mark Kelly, and I'm so glad that he's in the United States Senate, but how many millions of dollars did he get left with in the bank for his reelection in 2 years? Because this was a special for that seat. And how many millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars could have got put into trying to flip the state house and the state legislature to prevent some of those bad laws from coming, to get a couple seats on the Board of Supervisors. We were super, super close. And here in Maricopa County, just like in Los Angeles County, it's a board of 5. And right now it's 4-1 Republican. And they draw their own seats. So that's another redistricting thing. Paying attention to local races and local election administrator races across the country is going to be huge. And so those are the three things I think that are most important in Arizona.
And so, with all of that as the future challenges of Arizona, what is Adrian Fontes going to do? So what's next for you now that you're, going on vacation for a minute and then coming back to the fight?
Yeah,
What's up for you?
the vacation plan is literally like 3 p.m. to 11 a.m. the following day at a Marriott by myself with a bag of beef jerky and some San Pellegrino.
Too much information there,
Well,
guy.
maybe half a bottle of tequila. Anyway, what it's going to really be is, I'm not leaving. I'm good friends with a guy named Jason Kander, who lost a very important race. I very, very deeply admire the work of Stacey Abrams, who lost the last race she was in. I am pretty well known across the country in the world of elections administration for understanding the on-the-ground very specifics of how it is that elections are run, right? From barcodes to HR policies to IT systems to voter registration regulations at the federal and state in Arizona level, but there's a lot of similarities across the country. My unique skill set puts me in a place to be able to advocate for the good types of stuff that need to happen and advocate against sort of the horseshit that's going to be thrown up against the wall. There is a potential for I don't know how far I want to go with this group, but there's a potential that I could be on a ballot here sometime very soon. I'm looking at some other options as well, advocacy spaces. I would love to, help in any way that I can. Andy, you and I have talked about working with Power Pack or some of the other organizations out there and popping in and out as necessary. I'm happy to be, one of those, what do you call, like the glad warriors out there, because I have the experience, because I have the bona fides, and I've got receipts, right? I know that we did damn good work here in Maricopa County, and I've got receipts to prove it. So what is next? Kind of stand by. And I will tell all of the donors on this call and the folks that are seeing this later, you haven't seen the last of me. So the only ask I have is pay attention, because I'll be popping up sometime soon.
So just for everyone, watching and listening, Power Pack has gotten to know Adrian over the last few months, and, we've become quick fans of his work and what he's done. We will share with all of you kind of the accounts that he has open right now, and, helping, whether it's helping him retire any kind of debt or whether it's helping him get ready for his next run. I think we want to be supportive, and we are asking folks to kind of really take a look at him and really follow his career, because I think he's going to be really important for Arizona. And then for us at Power Pack, we're going to be leaning on him to really help us understand and figure out what to do around the Latino population, nationwide. And it's been a sore spot for us that we've not been able to have a really concerted, very good effort, either in fundraising and or in executing in a lot of these states. And I think for a place like Georgia, that could be a very, very important value add that we can bring. And so I think we're going to be doing, leaning on Adrian for a lot of advice and a lot of collaboration to kind of figure out how we can kind of make some inroads in this space as well. But again, please contact us if you're interested in supporting Adrian and, contributing to his accounts. We'll have those available, and our fundraising staff will be reaching out to you with information about that. So Adrian, any last words for us? Any advice for all of us who are trying to protect democracy out there?
I'll tell you what, the new normal isn't the new normal, and there's nothing normal about it. We have some major, I don't want to say esoteric, but I'm missing the word in my head. There's some massive, massive stuff that we need to think very, very carefully about across the spectrum in this country, if we are going to make sure to not fall into the rhetorical trap of the authoritarian. We have to protect this democracy. And that's why my hashtag protect democracy has been with me. We're at an inception point right now, and we've got to fight with everything that we've got. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are in an active zone, and we need to have folks who understand, under the worst scrutiny, under the hardest pressure,
who understand how it is to make the right decisions at those moments to push the agenda forward through cycle after cycle and help develop those leaders. That to me is an incredibly important thing that we have to work on very diligently.
Thanks so much, Adrian. And I want to thank everybody for joining us and everyone who's watching this on video. Your support is everything to us. And, you know, we could not have done all the work we've done over the last decade without your support. So we really appreciate and want to celebrate this election with you, that we've been able to change the world back a little bit. And we look forward to where Adrian goes next. And please keep an eye on where we're going next. So thank you all. Thank you very much.